How does empathy and accountability intersect to shape a better future for older adults, families, and senior living? My guest today, Rebecca Adelman, is redefining leadership within healthcare and senior living through her work-life being philosophy and focus on unique abilities. Her approach promotes a transformative culture shift where empathy and empowerment become the cornerstones of care and professional excellence. As an attorney, entrepreneur, and thought leaders with nearly 35 years of experience, Rebecca brings her insights and compassion to support families and professionals. Her impact stretches beyond the legal field. She is the founder of an all-women Adelman firm and claims management. She has not only established a groundbreaking claims management model, but has also launched initiatives like the Adelman-Mettle Care Alliance and Guide Path, focusing on culture change and expectations management within senior living. She's received numerous accolades. She's been honored with awards. She's a national speaker, and she regularly shares her wisdom on women in business, enterprise risk management, and senior living culture through webinars like the Senior Living Empower Hour and publications. Today, she offers us guidance on navigating care transitions with empathy and foresight, whether discussing legal protections for families, addressing the emotional challenges of caregiving, or sharing resources to stay informed. She empowers us to approach these decisions with clarity and compassion. Here is my interview with Rebecca Adelman. Rebecca, we've been waiting for this day. We are finally here together, and I am so looking forward to your wisdom and your insight. Thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, Nicole, it is my pleasure. And indeed, it feels like we really have been waiting to be together. Before we kick this off and share with your audience, I really want to just take a moment and create some space for honoring this next generation of thought leaders and innovators and thinkers and carers. And I just really want to let you know how inspired I am and how being with you, being with this new generation of, senior living movers and shakers has just been, very transformative for my own professional life and my personal life. So I want to make sure you know that. And then everyone who's listening, that's in that circle really understands how important it is for someone like me who's been in senior living in all sorts of different dimensions for 35 plus years, how important it is to me and how inspiring and how much I deeply admire and appreciate what everyone's doing. So that's really the excitement about getting together today, is to just really to be able to share that. So I can do a mic drop and go. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
love it. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that is so encouraging. And we need to hear that. The days can be hard and long, and to keep
Mhm.
going. And your mentorship and encouragement means the world. So thank you.
Call me anytime. I am here for that. I am a big cheerleader for this movement. It really is a movement. So I'm very grateful for that. So anyway, thanks for giving me this space to share that.
Oh, honored to. And one of the things that drew me to you is that light that you bring into the space, right? When you share, we hadn't met yet, but your, different LinkedIn posts and things like that, where it was like that encouragement and wisdom and dropping those moments of like glimmers, right? That
Oh,
joy that we need. So it's
thank
so,
you for that.
so wonderful. And now we all
Thank
get
you.
to learn from you, right?
Well, I appreciate that. I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, completely. I am so excited to hear more about your background and how you were inspired to become an attorney and what led you to be focused on senior living defense litigation, claims and risk management, your heart for care, this mentorship role that you have. Tell
Mm.
us more about that.
Well, thank you for asking. Everyone has a very special and unique story of how they arrived at senior living, right? Everyone does.
Yeah.
I know your story is quite special, and in many ways, ours intersect. I had a personal journey. Sort of started with a professional journey. So I guess I'll start there, and then I'll share with you sort of the intersection with my personal journey and my father, my grandmother, and our lives together as they were, aging and and I was caring for them. So professionally, I've been a lawyer for, I like to tell people I'm an entrepreneur with a law degree, but
Mm.
I've been a lawyer attorney for, 35 years. I went to law school, I'm from Michigan, so I'm, in your area.
Yeah,
I'm around lakes.
best girls.
I'm a Midwestern girl at heart, even though I have been in the South now for a lot of decades. But, I went to Michigan and University of Michigan, and from there went to graduate school overseas, studied French and business. Came back and wanted to, keep in mind, this is in like the 1980s. So I wanted to find some education, some graduate education that was really going to, one, serve me so that I could be of service. And I talked to my dad for a long time about it. And, my father, who was my own champion and a grand champion of women, was hiring women in positions beyond like secretarial, early on in his business practice in our family-owned business, was a real champion for my independence. And when I was really beginning, when I was young, I said,
Mm.
"What do you think, Dad?" And he said, "A law degree, being able to sort of understand your rights and be able to understand the rights for others and protections and justices, like it seems to me like that would be a solid way to go." So I wound up going to law school. I finished up law school and found my way to Memphis, and started my practice here as a malpractice lawyer. And what that really means is I started in a defense firm where I was defending, this is sort of the early 90s, and I was defending hospitals, doctors, really in that whole healthcare space.
Mhm.
And then early on, probably in, maybe early 90s, we started to see these lawsuits against senior living providers,
Mm.
nursing homes, really not assisted living back then, mostly nursing homes. And there were a couple of boutique plaintiffs firms that were pursuing these lawsuits against nursing homes. And because of where I was situated as a defense lawyer, I was starting to defend those cases. And I started to see and research and get very, very curious about the whole body of law, the regulations. It was very different. It was a complete horse of a different color than what was used to. So then I sort of became an expert. Like many of us, I carved out a niche, defending senior living claims. And that's really how it all began. And from there, my entrepreneurial spirit moved me into probably deeper and deeper education around what senior living is, what's a skilled facility, what kind of regulations, because I was in that world pretty much 80 to 90% of the time as I
Mhm.
had developed my practice. I ultimately saw the future of aging and the aging population back then and decided I would take off and open my own law firm. So
What did you do?
yeah, so
Yeah.
that, and this is kind of part of the journey. And about 25 years ago, I started my own law firm. And one of the reasons I wanted to start my own law firm was not only because I saw a vision around um, senior living, defending senior living, advocating, finding solutions. Like
Mhm.
I was able to move from a sort of a legal ecosystem that was focused on really only defending a crisis as opposed to trying to find solutions for the crisis and then the correlating way to improve care. That was really what I started to see early on.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then from there, started my own firm, and I knew I wanted to be a parent. So, of course, way back then, it was like a different world for women in terms
Yeah.
of like being able to raise a child and still have, so I'm like, I'll just do it myself and have my own business so no one can onboard me, offboard me.
Right. You
Yeah, there's no board to get on and off.
Mm-hmm.
So I wound up, having my beautiful son. And at the same time, I was building a very robust practice, both in litigation and risk management and senior living. And my parents were aging, right? So I had
Mm-hmm.
a child and I had aging parents and I had aging grandparents at that time. So our family really placed a lot of value on our togetherness
Mhm.
and our family system.
Yeah,
So as my grandparents were aging and as my parents were aging, I was also raising a child and I was really defining what a sandwich generation caregiver was.
completely. You were right in the middle.
Right in the middle. And I started to see early on, again, very curious. There must be more people like me out there who are raising children and also taking care of their grandparents and
Mhm.
taking care of their parents.
Yeah.
And so I learned more about that and educated myself and gathered up resources and, started my own like personal initiatives on how to help manage my family's journeys.
Mm.
Because as a lawyer in the family, I was kind of like the go-to
Yeah.
for problem solving. And so that is where my worlds started to very much intersect. And it's at that intersection that like I really grew personally and professionally. So and then as we move past that, I have a thriving law firm where I still defend senior living. And I've moved down the risk spectrum where I do some risk management work. And then I keep moving down the spectrum to real family and patient and person engaged sort of care models, which is where the guide path comes in. So that's kind of my journey, a broad stroke of my journey.
Ah, what a rich journey. And I
Oh,
love how you kept using the word curiosity because those curiosities have brought you to then each new path, the innovation that you have, and wanting to focus on the solution, right? And like, what is that solution? Not just managing those challenges, but really looking at how can I better provide care and support to the people that I serve and really get to the heart of the solution. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so
yeah.
important. And
And
all
make
the
that change just like you're doing, and then how do we take all of that and then really kind of correlate it as quickly as we can
Mhm.
into improved care, improved processes, improved family systems, whatever the area is that we can create better value and avoid and mitigate problems happening and improve the whole system. That is really where, to me, my mission was. That was
Right.
my mission. Yeah, is my mission.
Such so valuable, so valuable. And I love that today we're going to really kind of dive into that, looking at how do we understand transitions in care? How do we educate and engage families, right? Like both
Mhm.
of us have been involved in needing to be that support system for not only our loved ones, but now, right? The broader scope of our industry. And there's a lot of uncertainty when you're in it. A lot of families feel really overwhelmed as they're facing what do I do next? What options are available to me? How do I even understand that? Right? I mean, I think there's so much just when you don't know what you don't know
Mhm.
until you're in it. And so you probably see a lot of families that are in multiple different stages in their care journey. What are you seeing as those most common logistical challenges,
Mhm.
emotional challenges that families face? And then the second part of that is how do we guide them through that? How do you guide them through that?
Really compelling topic. So I think that what I have learned over time, and I guess it might help you to really understand too, or be interesting for you to know that my perspective early on in my career on how the experience was for families
Mhm.
came directly from the families and from the residents, those people we were caring for who'd been somehow aggrieved.
Mm.
Okay. So
Mhm.
as a defense lawyer, I'm actually, taking statements and I am taking the depositions and the sworn statements of families who have arrived at a point in their experience where they're suing us.
Right.
Right. So, I'm in my young part of my career, and this is where my curiosity really started. And then it's a sort of a sideways journey to get to what you're asking me, but I think it's really important to appreciate the perspective.
Absolutely.
And early on in my practice, I began to ask these questions like, Tell me what you knew. Like, what information did you have when your loved one when you were making the decisions for your loved one? Was it a planned transition? Was it an unplanned transition? What kind of resources did you have? What kind of information? What kind of expectations did you have? What was the source of those expectations? Maybe it was a doctor. Maybe it was keep in mind, like back then, the consumer didn't have like a whole internet to go and research.
Right.
Right. I mean, I know, like, you're like, oh my goodness, this woman. Anyway,
So true.
but they were just either getting it from their doctor, your loved one's aging, they've got these chronic conditions. People were not nearly as holistic in their approach to their own caregiving and the caregiving of someone in their families or in their circle. So that perspective was just so unbelievably valuable to me, because I actually did learn from the real source about what families need and what residents might need during these transitions. And here's what I came up with. What I came up with is that, we all have these life experiences, right? We all have these biases. We all have these underlying sort of universal needs and feelings about certain things, right? We have a fear that our loved one could get injured. We have a fear we could get injured. We're afraid and guilty about not being able to care for someone. We're worried about financial stability. These are it doesn't matter if you're Nicole Will or Rebecca Adelman, these are very underlying human needs and feelings. And what I learned early on is that most of those, when it comes to our aging parents or transitions in care, are needs and feelings that are unexpressed, unexplored, unmet needs. And there wasn't really a space or a platform or any kind of resource or communication engagement tools or initiatives in order for people to learn about senior living or aging, or what is, a chronic underlying condition mean, or what happens when my loved one has dementia. Like they didn't even know what to ask, but more importantly, it was about exploring the underlying feelings and the underlying needs, Nicole. So I think that what I see from logistical challenges and emotional challenges now, sort of years later, much of it hasn't really changed, is the need to communicate and talk to the people around you. What does life mean to them? What does life mean to you? Right?
Yeah.
What does that really mean? Like, what is the truth of the quality of my life? What matters to me? Right? What matters to you, mom, grandma, friend? And let's all have some foundation in reality about the true fact is that we are all aging every day. We
Yeah.
age in different ways. Some of us age healthy, some of us age unhealthy. Sometimes that changes. We don't know. We just very much do our best. But what we do know is sort of what matters to us and what brings us, what kind of risks we're willing to put up with, let's say. How do we want the dignity in our life to show later? And so I think that really kind of getting in tune with your own emotional concerns or underlying emotions, sharing those, underlying the underlying needs and emotions of the people around you, get you better informed to ask the questions.
Yeah.
And so then from a logistical standpoint, I think that what happens is that there is this sort of continuum of, either a slow aging process, or there is an unplanned event that happens. There's always there is either a sort of a precipitating event that results in us having to transition in care, right? To a different level, whether that's from home and home health, or home to hospital, hospital to assisted living, home to assisted living. These are all transitions in care. And I think the more we communicate about it, the more we've sort of understand everyone's affairs. What do you want to happen? Where do you want to live? How can we educate ourselves about all of our different options? Just unveiling it all and having it And I think this, before we get on the call, we were having a sort of a conversation around being able to lay out some kind of a vision years before we really have to make these decisions. And you're doing such a brilliant job of that through bringing people together, through collaborations, through content, all of that, and the work that you're doing. And I think that, that idea of like, we have to shift our paradigm about caring for our older adults. I just had this conversation with one of my colleagues. We have to frame this in a way that's very positive. Collectively living together, making decisions about transitioning and care. Yes, there's some losses. And how are we going to plan for the losses? Right? How do we plan for leaving a home where we've been for 50 years? How do we manage losing some of our privacy because we want to be somewhere where we can still be autonomous, but we're living together because that social model is so critically important to our well-being, right? Yeah. So I think it's just really about having the conversations and then getting educated logistically about what the different types of care models look like. What do you really want? What can you afford? Right?
Piece,
so all of these issues, I think, are sort of at the heart of the whole continuum, and we're all entering it at different points.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, each family is in their own way navigating these different phases at different times, right? There's not a universal roadmap, unfortunately, right? And within that, yeah, we were talking about how do we have that education and those conversations much prior, in the almost 200 guests that I've had on the podcast, there's this overwhelming theme of plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. That is like overarching. And I think that by having more conversation, by having more visibility, by awareness, we start to think through those things earlier and not at that point of crisis, right? And so I think we're both on that mission of how do we take these conversations and reach families prior to having to make those decisions, right? Because that is that transition of care, is that decision point of when we're doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add a kind of one important layer in there is that, and this because of the work you're also doing in your travels, and as do I, culturally we have to also sort of demystify this idea of living and dying, right? We have to really kind of embrace this idea that we are all on this journey, and whatever your belief system is, whatever, doesn't really matter. We're on a journey, and it's gonna, at least the one we know right now, is gonna end. And having that conversation around, like, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What are we afraid of? And I think that this, the planning is so critically important. When I think about planning, Nicole, I think about something that's sort of like above the neck, right? Planning stuff is kind of up here.
Yeah.
Right. But there's also this planning that is below here that comes from this space. It comes from, internal planning. Yeah. Like, what is that? Having those conversations. And, we have to get very real and transparent about like how we as a culture here in America versus even in other places, how we have that conversation about death and dying, like, honestly, if there's a lot of conversation around, healthy living and how we're going to find, everyone has this vision in their mind of like, right, I'm going to be 80 and, I'm going to be living in that cool place that someone built, and, it's going to be a really nice place with nice outdoor areas and all that kind of stuff. But what happens like when that doesn't work out that way? Right. Like, how are we envisioning that? How are we conversing about, sometimes the wheels fall off and our pipes fail, and like we become debilitated and people become not functional in their aging life, but they still have like a whole life to live.
Right.
And they still have a lot of value and quality that they want to contribute, and they still have risks that they're willing to take. And so I guess that's part of the conversation is really about, yeah, it's important to plan, but it's
Mm.
also important to like feel what this is all about
Right.
and then plan around how are we really feeling about things? Because to me, the decision about kind of what to do is
Hmm.
driven about by how we feel about it.
Completely.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Like, oh, yeah. And I've never heard it framed like that, but gosh, that is kind of a mic drop moment in a way because it's like how the choices we make are based on how we feel and our desire of how we want to live out those years, right? And what that looks like for us, which is so different and unique to who we are and our lived experiences. Yeah.
Our history and our
Yeah.
family systems and our,
Mhm.
our just our lives, and to me, what's been sort of magical about the journey in senior living for me, I mean, in addition to just, I'm a person who I love the law, I love being an attorney.
Yeah.
I've always loved it. And so, that aspect of my life has been just so rewarding in 1,000 ways. However, like the real magic has been journeying with people and listening to their stories, sometimes on the other side of a table, but having me ask them under oath, tell me about your mom.
Right.
Tell
Yeah.
me about your life with your mom. Tell me about your own life. So when your mom came to live with our senior living community, what happened to your life?
Mm. I love
And
that you asked that
she's like,
question.
I can just give you thousands of examples, Nicole, and I'm actually compiling a piece on this particular issue.
Mm.
But what we forget, and we'll probably be discussing this later, what we
Mm.
can never forget is when there is a transition in care, it's a transition for everyone.
Right. Right.
One of the
Completely.
questions I will, ask people when I'm deposing them because they're suing our communities or they have a grievance
Mhm.
is tell me about how your life changed. And they will
Mm.
tell me all sorts of stories.
Yeah.
Invariably, they will say, thank you for asking. It's
Mm.
been 3 years since my mother passed, and no one's ever even asked what happened when I was her caretaker for 10 years.
Right.
And the next thing you know, I was coordinating everything for her. I was leaving my job at a certain time. My
Mm.
kids had to go here and there. And then all of a sudden, my mother was living in her new home.
Mm.
And I had an ill-defined role. I didn't even know what to do. I think
Mm.
that's a conversation we're going to have soon here, you and me, is
Absolutely.
about how do we take this caregiver, this family member, and create this sort of care partnership and redefine their role when their loved one comes to live in a new home.
Yeah.
Because that to me is a very key uh it's just a key that
Mm.
unlocks,
Mhm.
it unlocks a lot of emotional burdens,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. It
And I feel like that is something we can offer is helping to define a person's role when their loved one comes to live with us. You are the expert. Tell us everything
Yeah.
you know about your mom
Oh,
or your
yeah.
dad or your grandma, grandpa. Be
Right.
part of our care team. You are the one.
Right.
Like,
Right.
come
Right.
visit, come spend time, tell us stories.
Mm.
Tell us what's going on in your life. Do you have the support you need now that your mom's living with us? Your
Yeah.
dad's living with us, whatever. Like these are the real intricacies
Mhm.
of transition that, you know, if we don't explore those, if we're not curious from the seats we sit in, you and I sit in, then what happens is depression, guilt,
Mhm.
grievances, complaints,
Mhm.
unmet needs, poor care, caregivers who like don't want to deal with the family, you name it. You've been a director.
Oh my gosh, completely. Yeah.
So that's how I feel about all that.
What a brilliant insight from the families themselves that they were able to share with you because of those questions. And they've not had the space to be able to do that before.
Yeah. No one's ever asked them.
Right, right.
No
Which
one's
is
ever.
such a reminder for us. We have to ask those questions,
Mhm.
and we're going to talk more about that. Before we transition into really bringing those families into those conversations, for families themselves that are thinking through, okay, we're going to be facing this transition. How do we best prepare? What are some of those practical insights? What are you finding is helpful in those moments, even from like a legal standpoint? What we should think about, what we should have in place to kind of maybe mitigate some of
Yeah.
those frustrations that do come?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So from, your legal eagle over here, I really want to encourage everyone. We talk about planning up here.
Mhm,
There are certain things that we really should get in place. We need to have conversations with the people we love and with our own selves to have
mhm,
some kind of like, legal and financial planning, right? We need some powers of attorney in place. We need to have somebody designated as the person who can make decisions for us at some point.
yeah,
Um, we need to have durable powers of attorney for healthcare so that if we do become unable to make our own healthcare decisions, we have designated someone who understands us, make sure they understand you.
right, right.
Okay. I don't need to
Choose
dive too much
wisely.
deeper into that. If you want to make sure this is the
Wisely.
person who's on your team, right?
Right.
I jest, but anyway, and somebody who really appreciates and understands what kind of healthcare decisions you would want. You want to make sure you've got, your will in place. You want to
Mhm.
make sure that, there are lots of great resources out there. The 5 wishes, there's all sorts of resources out there where you can start those good conversation starters. But
Yeah.
when it comes down to like paperwork, make sure you've talked to the people who are the closest to you so that, or help the person in your life who you're caring for to make sure you understand where everything is. Get a folder together. I know it sounds crazy, but just get a folder together and have all the paperwork and have all your accounts, lined up. And these kinds of things might lead to the deeper conversations we need to have,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But just making sure your financial is in order, your legal is in order. There are lots of people out there who can help with that, including myself. And so that's I guess an important thing. And then, so one of the beautiful things about being in this space and encountering uh, you know, people like you, Nicole, and others, is
Mhm.
that they are a wealth of information. And for example, there are Michelle Magner, a friend and colleague of mine, does a great job with, amazing resources in helping families exactly like this,
Yeah.
helping educate them, helping them understand in very easy ways and simple ways. On transitions in care. There's a lot of those kind of people out there. Seek them out.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of resources, National Institute on Aging. There are all sorts of resources out there that people can use to understand sort of the the logistics of things and
Yeah.
helpers who are out there. Just there are so many helpers out there. And more every day, people who are really committed to doing like the work you're doing, Nicole. So I
Mhm.
think that's it. Create your team. Everyone needs this tribe of people and
Mhm.
a community of people because we cannot do this by ourselves. It's nearly impossible. If I hadn't had a whole community when I was raising a child and taking care of 2 generations of my loved ones. So I
Mhm.
had 4 generations, we were all together. It's a
Mhm.
lot of generations. I'll send you a picture when we're done.
Oh, I'd
Get
love
a
to see
beautiful picture of like all 4 of us, like this, all
what.
4 generations of us together.
Yeah.
And, you know, um, there are people who are experts in that who have really committed their life to that. So go find those helpers is what I would suggest.
I love that you share those resources. And that's so true. There are people out there that really give those specific conversations to have and dynamics and information and where to
Checklists.
go. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Helpful.
absolutely.
So
Mhm.
helpful. When you're working with families or you've had that interaction with them, have you seen like what's the difference between families that are successful in working with their loved one to kind of incorporate that transition dynamic versus things that don't go as well?
This is a really great question. And, you know, it's like any other family dynamic, isn't it, though?
Mm,
What makes a successful family unit or
yeah,
system?
yeah,
And, if there's conflict in the family, if there are dynamics and imbalances in control or imbalances in power, or you've got the sort of the remote caregiver or the children who are sort of all trying to make decisions and maybe they don't get along. It really is underlying it all is resolving the internal conflicts that are in your life. That's
yeah,
what that's what makes success, period.
right.
Right? It makes success in business. It makes success in your decisions about transitions in care. It makes success in your relationships.
Hmm.
Is if there are this goes back to, it's such a great way to go back to sort of remember the game tag, and you had to like go back to base.
Yeah,
You may be too young for that, but there was a game and you would freeze
remember.
tag, right? And so, but going back to base is if there are unmet needs and feelings and that are unexpressed, and we're not getting to the heart of sort of our own internal conflict and conflict in the system, you could be making the greatest decisions in the world and you still may not be successful with these transitions or making, because underneath it all, somehow or another, it's going to make its way to the surface. It always does.
Yeah,
So I think that the real success comes from everyone's willingness, everyone's commitment to be transparent and to be real about how they feel. And
mm,
I think once we do that, we have
mhm,
like a real opportunity to have success in whatever we do. And
mhm.
especially if we've been resistant to this, if we've been resistant to trying to resolve in family dysfunction or not addressing trauma in our lives with our families, the collective decision of how we're going to care for older adults in our system, in our
Mhm.
ecosystem, is the best opportunity ever to get real with it. That's
Yeah,
how I see it. Like
yeah,
if you've been resisting it up until now, because now is really the time to let it all go and to make the commitment to express all of that and trust that with the intention of
mm,
making the best decisions for someone who needs you as a caregiver,
yeah,
that the right answers will come if
yeah,
we're doing the work, you know?
yeah,
And I think that's what I have found, that the families I've met with, that I've deposed, the ones who are aggrieved, the ones who are, looks like they're complaining. And I'm not saying that, there are some motives out there that aren't, financially driven and someone's just suing us for money.
right,
That totally exists. It's different than this conversation we're having, though.
right,
This
right,
conversation we're having is about the family members who say, I
mm,
didn't really even know what to expect.
right,
I didn't know. No one really told me. Like
mm,
my whole life fell apart when my loved one went to the hospital. The next thing I know, they got to go to a skilled nursing facility and rehab. I had no
mhm,
idea what was even going on. I didn't even know what Medicare was. I didn't
mm,
know, I don't know anything. I didn't
yeah,
even understand like what this meant. Like who would my mom live with? My dad, like what was going to happen? And they sort of stayed in the dark around that.
mm,
So their role was more defined as like a supervisor. Every time they're there, they're out looking, what's happening to my mom and what's happening to me. And that didn't work like that at home, and complaining about it or concerned about it because they didn't really have any information.
mhm,
So I think that's, to me, ask questions, be curious, try and resolve your own internal and systems issues as we take on the very important responsibility of caring for the people in our lives. You know what I
right,
mean?
right. Yeah, I love that you touch on that because it is such an emotional dynamic, right? When we have people that we love and we're unsure about what's happening in their life and we're might have anxiety about making the right decision or we don't want to make the wrong decision. And there is so many factors at play. And one of the questions I have that just came to me, so this is
Mm,
like a little bit of a surprise question. We talk about how families do feel that their role has been defined, right? They are in a new dynamic, a new setting. For the communities that you've worked with or that you've had the opportunity to interact with, which communities, what do they get right in terms of supporting the family member? So for families that are looking at, we're transitioning,
mhm.
we're looking for that next, what are some things for them to identify within those organizations so that that is a successful transition?
That's why you are the next leader, because that is a
Oh,
great question.
thank you.
That's it.
Thank
So what's going right? Here's what's going right. What's going right are communities that have like a very, very robust onboarding, education for family members, education for extended family members, and some way to understand who they are. Because your family might look a lot different than my family. My
right.
family might not be, just me and my son and, two other people. It might be someone in my church. It might be somebody in my faith-based community. It might be a very, very close friend who's been caring for my mom. Like we need to know what is your system? What is your family system? So the communities that recognize immediately that you are a care partner and want to put you in that role, that'd be the first thing. What
Yeah.
role do I play in the community? How often can I visit? These are kind of like less important questions, but like, visit whenever you want. I mean, you're literally, it's your loved one's home. Like they're living in a new home. As much
Yeah.
as you'd visit them down the street, go visit them at their new home. Um, Also, communities that have a program in place or programs in place, these are the ones that I always recommend. I really love sort of family adoption programs. So you've
Mm,
got a family that's at the community who has a willingness within the program to adopt a new family to
mhm.
help them navigate. Maybe it's a family that both of the residents have dementia. And so that is a family so creating some sort of internal support community where the families can be transparent with each other, right? And we have some kind of an adoption. I love that. I really also love, I think they could be looking out for organizations that have, you know, important like family councils for sure, where the families can be involved, but also like education series and ways that, so one of the things that I do for the communities I work with is I help them or I guide them into sort of coordinating um, uh, outside resources or even internal resources to educate families. So having like a family night program, it's so important.
Yeah.
You could have a geriatrician come in. You could have someone who's like I go to these communities and I'll talk about trust and estates and I'll talk about wills. I'll talk about planning. I'll talk about advanced directives, just educating families so they feel like that you are on the journey with them.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, one of the biggest things too is look for a community where you're not just meeting with the marketing director and the nursing director you want to be meeting with the people who work there. Who
Yeah.
are the people who are going to help care for my loved one day in and day out? I want to meet my care force.
Completely.
I want to meet all those people who I want to know their names. I want to meet them.
Mhm.
Because if you think about like, and I'm sure you know this, you're going to go to a new community, if it's a planned transition. If it's an unplanned transition, it's a little bit different, but you're going to go and check out a few communities and what do they look like? What do they feel like? What are the people like? What are the promises? Don't listen to all of them,
Yeah.
go learn for yourself. But more importantly, like, are they greeting me with like the people who are actually going to be the care people?
Right.
That is the ticket.
Hands
And
on. Yeah.
then at these meetings and these family meetings in education, the caregivers should be the ones who are leading the way. Let
Mm.
us tell you about, what we do every day. Let us tell you about, you've got 4 families, 5 families at a family night. You get them a little something to eat. They're all together and their caregivers are there
Yeah.
and they're talking to us. Like
Mhm.
that is empowering the caregivers and then also like helping the families recognize the importance of their role as a care partner.
Yeah. Oh, I just so love that you talk about that. It's what we need and what, you and I have been championing, right? Is that whole idea of how do we touch families? How do we encourage them in the role that they have, not take them away from that because they are still caregivers, even though their loved one lives in a community. Absolutely. Continuing that conversation. One of my questions is also, do you know of any communities that have a role that is designated just for family caregiver advocacy within, let's say, senior living corporate community, right? So, one of the visions that I have is I would love to see there be this almost like national family caregiver advocacy position that really looks at how do we prioritize and cater to the needs and rights of families? How do we have positive family involvement? How do we support their family caregiver experiences across the communities, right? And start to reach people not only within the community itself, but the greater community, right? Their neighborhood and their city and possibly even the state, and really advocate for what their needs are, having that education piece, collaborate with people like the work that you do, local caregiver support companies, right? Like we know that there are this this care economy force that is out there. And how do we curate all of that to be able to then say, families, here is your support system. And we are, to your point, guides for you within that. So I know.
Yeah, I'm all behind that. Put me on that group in that group.
Yeah,
So call me when you're ready to when you're working in that direction because
love it. Yeah.
I want to make one comment and then I'll let you know. I'm not familiar with that. I
Okay.
don't know of any communities that have sort of the designated advocate for families.
Yeah.
Um, my comment first is this. When I'm deposing these family members, I ask them that question, Nicole,
Mm.
right? What if it's sort of the line of questioning starts with, help me understand what role you had, what role you thought you had at the
Mm.
community, right? Just tell me what you thought. What were your expectations? What did you know? What did you think? And again, invariably, in some way, the answer would be something like, well, I was kind of a visitor. I was given the visiting hours and, here's when, or like the visiting time, here's when it's best to visit. We serve dinner at this time. You can, and it turned into sort of like a gap creation, like creating a polarization between there's your loved one in our community
Mm.
and then there's you.
Wow.
And now that wasn't the reality necessarily, but
Mm.
that's what they thought.
Right.
That's what they had no reason to think anything different. That
Hmm.
person you're talking about, the family advocate who said, here are the ways you can get involved. Here are the ways you can be a care partner. Here's an awesome questionnaire you can fill out so we know what you want to do and how you can be involved in our community. This is not rocket science,
Yeah.
right? We're
Yeah.
not trying to, recruit SpaceX astronauts here. We're trying
Hmm.
to get families involved in places where they need to be and want to be. My point was that I was going to make was that when I then ask the follow-up question, what if your role had been defined as a care partner, that you are actually on the care team? Literally, the answers are always, wow, if someone would have told me that, that would have shifted everything that I felt. I would have felt relieved. I would have felt valued. I would have, you name the emotion.
Wow.
But here's my point to your comment is, it's not like it's a long way you got to go. It's not like you've got to try and convince people, come into our care communities and be a care partner. They want to do that.
Yeah.
They don't know how to do that. They don't even know that that's possible. So it's not like they're, you're trying to like convince the move between what if and would you is about this big, right?
Yep.
And so I think that the idea of, I do want to add something here though, and just sort of not necessarily a cautionary tale, but a way to maybe reframe this idea of like family advocacy. When we start to think about, and I've learned this over time, when we think about rights and your right to this, or we sort of create around that a sort of it in and of itself, framing it that way creates some kind of polarizing, like the family advocate. We know what you mean. I know what you mean. You know what you mean. However, if we frame it that way, it might turn into some way of like, well, then there's like their advocate and then like our advocate. And advocacy in and of itself somehow creates a polarization and space and between things. I'm an advocate for must mean I'm also an advocate against. I mean, you can't be both, right,
Oh,
Nicole?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
interesting and so true. Yeah.
and it's so true. So if I'm an advocate for families, that must mean I'm an advocate not for something else. Now, you fill in the blanks. I don't know, whatever you want to. I'm not going to be advocating for there may be no blank to fill in, but the point is, it's so important how we use our words. It's important what those words, the sort of the charge that they have. And when we think about rights, resident rights, someone was educating me on this, when we think about like, well, resident rights, they have the right to do this, they have the right to do this. But what about if we reframe it into like, there's a dignity around it, as opposed to like, they have a right to something. Because
Right.
as soon as it's rights, it's like, a different feeling about it. And I can just tell you from the legal perspective. So as we move on with the work around this, and as you particularly with your focus, be thinking about framing that in a way that is inclusive and that is, partnership and collaboration language. And because when we talk in terms of like relationships,
Yeah.
we talk in terms of common understandings, or we talk in terms of like deep knowledge about each other, we're really not talking about advocacy. What we're really talking about is understanding. We're
Yeah.
talking about like not somebody being right or correct, but being connected and not corrected. So I think that we we can do things like, again, just sort of sometimes stepping back and recognizing that. So I'm in though. Count me in, hand raised.
Well, I will be calling you and saying, let's talk through as we put this position together, what that title will be.
Well, we
So we
will
can,
we'll find a magnificent way
I love it.
to message this, that is really all about, maybe it's like the family engagement coordinator, maybe it's the, whatever, but it could be, I don't know, the community engagement coordinator or something. But my point is that we want to dissolve these issues of like there's us and them, or there's this faction and this faction, and we want to dissolve all that.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. So true. Yeah. And I think that's where, having doing a lot of work with aging services, right, in the care economy and age tech, and then senior living, we've got that on one side. And what I would love to see is more of that intersection. So it's not an us versus them. It's a we together that we provide this incredible ecosystem of support. So, how do we do that? Right?
Mhm.
How do we really do that and not have it be so separate? I think some communities are diving into that a little bit and exploring that and doing that well. But I think we have a long way to go. And so I'm encouraged by it. And I don't think we're that far off. I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, but it's so important. And even with the work that you're doing with guide path and the support and the conversations that you're having, it's starting to look at that. And it's actually not even starting to look at it. It's doing the work, and it's starting to say we can provide education and support systems, and here's another avenue that we can implement that. And so I think that it's exciting to see. It really is.
It
Yeah.
is, and Nicole, I'd be remiss if I didn't add this in there. I think there's also sort of we cannot forget, well, one, I want to speak to this issue of like these different silos and how do we create the Venn diagram, right? How do we create that center space?
Mm,
I think that we're having the conversation more, but in terms of like, disrupting some around the conversation around competition and money. And,
mhm,
that is a real separator. So I
mhm,
think that that's really important, right? That this sort of scarcity mentality versus abundance mentality is really important. Like the idea that now we're actually living in a world where caring for older adults, we haven't even talked about the older adults that, you know, gosh, behavioral health, mental health, the
yeah.
homelessness issues around younger adults we're taking care of in our skilled facilities, education, training. These are conversations, these are think tank conversations.
Yeah.
And but I'd be remiss if I didn't add in there that there must always be a certain level of accountability.
Mhm,
So I think one of the most important, aspects of the work that I'm doing is that particularly guide path with our certification program, our culture change certification program, and with the additional solutions that guide path offers for residents, for families, for communities, for the insurance companies, for risk management, that we've really kind of touched on all the stakeholders in guide path,
mhm,
and the value propositions for all those stakeholders in the work we're doing.
mhm,
But there is a very important level of accountability. Like you
mhm,
can't make it through the certification program through whether you're here in the United States or globally, and we're working on our global pilot right now,
mhm,
without completing a commitment plan, which is an actionable implementation plan where you are going to take the work you're doing and get it into your community. And so
mhm,
I think that's an important aspect of the work you're doing and the
mhm,
work we're doing, and that in order to bring these sort of break down the silos and find a way for us all to work together to
mhm,
have the largest, to optimize everything that we all can bring to the table, there
mhm.
also has to be like a level of accountability. That's all. And whatever that looks like, let's not forget to add that in there, because it
Yeah.
it creates some staying power. The idea is sustainability and transformation. And we have to be able to kind of measure it, but we also have to have those of us in this sort of conscious army to
Mhm.
be accountable and say that went right, that didn't go right. I'm responsible for that. I'm not responsible for that.
Right.
Um, Let me help solve to that. But there is some level of accountability I think we all have to have for
Mhm.
caring for our older adults. So
I agree. And I'm so glad you brought that up. How can we connect with you? How can we learn more? Where can we go to
Mm.
implement some of, the work that you're doing and be able to do that?
Thank you for asking. What's your address? Because I'm going to come and stay with you for a week and
Yeah, I
find me
love
there. No, I'm
it.
just kidding. We can solve all
Let's
the
do it.
problems together, Nicole.
Right, exactly. I love it.
So I can be found at my law firm, which is, adelmanfirm.com. You can find me there online. You can find me at GuidePath. You can find our solutions, our senior living solutions at guidepathlLC.com. You can sign up for our newsletter and our resources and all that kind of stuff in all those places. You can find me on LinkedIn. I try and develop some important, hopefully valuable content there. And yeah, I mean, just come find me. That's the most important thing so we can continue these conversations. And
Oh,
again, like hats off, Nicole, the work you're doing with Think Tank, the work you're doing with the podcasting, the messaging, the transmission of really key information, being like a super power, helper. And I just want to encourage everyone to just dive into the work you're doing and how far reaching it goes to really, I mean, get inspired. Just totally get inspired.
oh,
And
I'm
anyway,
tearing up a little bit. Thank you.
no, and just showing up every day, just going in every day with the 100% commitment to everything that you're doing. I mean, talk about accountability, Nicole. Congratulations, and you're just making a world of difference, just a world of difference. And you just got to remember to, you know, it's just, it's just a little bit at a time.
Yeah, it
That's
is.
all. You drop the pebble in the ocean,
Mhm.
like you're dropping pebbles in the ocean and the
Oh,
ripple effect is unbelievable. I want to tell you,
wow.
like I'm here, so you got me.
Oh,
The wave struck me.
well, and I couldn't do it without you and all of the people that I'm able to meet and be supported by. It really is all of us together. It really is. So
Yeah, it is.
I
It's a whole
appreciate you.
village, isn't it? It is a very important village, and at the center of it is the well-being
Yeah,
of the people we care for. So,
I agree.
yeah.
What a beautiful hour we've had. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
it's been an
you.
hour. Oh my goodness.
I
All right.
know.
Thank you so much. And
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
really excited for our relationship to grow, and you can count on me anytime.
Thank you. Likewise.
I have been around for a very, very long time, and I still am one of those who can do, but I'm also, a teacher. So please seek me out. I am on, yeah, I'll get involved in anything you need me for.
Oh, I love that. I will take you up on that. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Are you looking for more support and community? We sure are. That is why I'm so happy to highlight one of my favorite podcasts in the caregiving community, Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver, hosted by my friends and sisters Natalie Elliott Handy and JJ Elliott Hill. They offer a unique blend of personal storytelling, expert advice, and candid conversations that shed light on the real life challenges and triumphs that caregivers face. Tune in to Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver wherever you enjoy your podcasts or explore more on their website at www.confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.